According to news reports, in your first week on the job, you got confused in a National Security Council meeting and thought President Trump wanted you to stop all aid to Ukraine. In a well-functioning administration, you would have asked for clarification before making that seismic policy shift, but instead you ordered vital military aid heading to the front lines turned around, costing the U.S. millions of dollars, and depriving Ukrainian soldiers of equipment they needed to fight Russia. So, Mr. Secretary, can you explain how exactly you misunderstood such a monumental presidential order?
One of many fake news headlines we've dealt with.
So, President Trump told you to halt military aid to Ukraine on January 30th? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Hegseth, Chairman Kane, thank you both for being here today. Mr. Secretary, your testimony over the last several days before Congress, I've heard you speak about all of your supposed accomplishments from your time at the Pentagon. I have to say, your training at Fox News has let you spend months of dangerous dysfunction and incompetence into catchy phrases like restoring the warrior ethos and increasing lethality. But the truth is, it's really been chaos at the Pentagon under your leadership. You've clearly shown you're unable to manage the Department of Defense, but what I'm most concerned about are three specific areas: your operational incompetence, your managerial incompetence, and your budgetary incompetence. So let's start with operational. According to news reports, in your first week on the job, you got confused in a National Security Council meeting and thought President Trump wanted you to stop all aid to Ukraine. In a well-functioning administration, you would have asked for clarification before making that seismic policy shift, but instead you ordered vital military aid heading to the front lines turned around, costing the U.S. millions of dollars, and depriving Ukrainian soldiers of equipment they needed to fight Russia. So, Mr. Secretary, can you explain how exactly you misunderstood such a monumental presidential order?
One of many fake news headlines we've dealt with.
So President Trump told you to halt military aid to Ukraine on January 30th?
As is often the case, highly ideological and very ill-informed reporters love to speculate about things they know nothing about in order to spear President Trump and myself.
So it sounds like actually the reporting is correct, because I will say, if it wasn't a mistake, why did aid restart only a few days later?
Again, we would take complete issue with what would some call reporting and others call a hatchet job.
So why did aid start just a couple days later?
I'm saying the reporting is inaccurate, ma'am.
I don't think that's correct. So let's move on to your managerial incompetence. I think we can see why you misunderstood the president, because you're obviously misunderstanding my questions. Less than a month into the job, you fired the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, CQ Brown, and the chief of naval operations, Lisa Franchetti, without cause. And to this day, you still have not provided an adequate explanation for removing them. As far as I can tell, you fired CQ Brown because he was black and Lisa Franchetti because she is a woman. So nearly 4 months later, we still don't have a new nominee for Chief of Naval Operations. News reports, and you can contest it, but I'd love to hear your answer, say that you haven't nominated someone because qualified admirals keep turning the position down. So tell me, Mr. Secretary, when will Congress receive your nomination for the next chairman of the next chief of naval operations?
Ma'am, with all due respect, I would suggest not believing every headline you read.
With all due respect, I'd like your nomination. When will we see it?
There has not a single admiral or any military official has turned down a position that's been.
So when will we see your nominee for the chief of naval operations?
In due time, for all the right reasons.
Again, I think we've seen the managerial incompetence. Okay, let's move on to budgetary incompetence. You missed the deadline to submit a draft defense budget to Congress, which makes it impossible for us to complete our work on the NDAA or appropriations, and makes it more likely you'll receive delays in funding you need for new acquisitions, programs, and other priorities. Additionally, you're blowing money on poorly conceived operations and vanity projects for President Trump. Retrofitting the Qatari jet to serve as Air Force One will cost about $400 million. The parade in D.C. this weekend will cost upwards of $40 million. Your bombing campaign in Yemen cost about $1 billion, and a week later they were having missile strikes in Israel. Your operations in LA will cost tens of millions of dollars, and you claim to be cutting costs at the Pentagon, but all I see are wasted dollars better spent addressing our most pressing threats like China. So, Mr. Secretary, what priorities have you cut funding for to pay for these projects?
Ma'am, I would just say your list left off securing the southern border.
So, Mr. Secretary, what priorities have you cut funding for to pay for these projects?
We make trade-offs every day, and I would imagine what we want to spend on is quite different than what the previous administration did.
Well, I think
Made
the American
those changes quickly, and they're reflected in this budget, and we're very proud of them.
I think the American people can see why I'm so concerned about this incompetence. Thank you, and I yield back.
What makes this exchange so striking isn't the sharpness of Mikie Sherrill's tone, it's the structure of her argument. She doesn't attack randomly. She builds a case, almost like a prosecutor, laying out 3 distinct categories of responsibility that define what a Secretary of Defense is actually supposed to do. And then she tests them, one by one. She begins with operational competence because that's the most immediate responsibility of the job. Decisions at this level don't stay on paper. They move equipment, shift troops, and affect lives in real time. Sherrill points to reports that in Hegseth's first week, he misunderstood a presidential directive and ordered U.S. military aid to Ukraine turned around mid-transit. For viewers, this is an important moment to pause and understand why that matters. Halting aid to a country actively fighting a major adversary like Russia isn't a minor administrative hiccup. It's a seismic signal to allies and enemies alike. In a functioning chain of command, ambiguity at that level is clarified before orders are issued. Sherrill's point is simple, but devastating. If there was confusion, the failure wasn't policy, it was judgment. Hegseth's response avoids that core issue. Rather than explain the decision-making process, he attacks the reporting. But Sherrill doesn't let him stop there. She asks a follow-up that exposes the gap. If the reporting was wrong, why was the aid restarted just days later? It's a basic accountability question, and the lack of a clear answer leaves viewers with an unmistakable impression. This isn't about media bias, it's about actions that already happened. Sherrill then moves to managerial competence, and this is where the exchange deepens. Managing the Department of Defense isn't about slogans or ideology. It's about continuity, stability, and trust inside a massive institution. She points to the firing of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Chief of Naval Operations early in Hegseth's tenure, 2 of the most senior uniformed leaders in the military. For viewers, this is where institutional context matters. These roles aren't symbolic. They anchor planning, morale, and coordination across services. Removing them without explanation sends shockwaves throughout the ranks. Sherrill presses on the absence of successors, especially for the Chief of Naval Operations, noting reports that qualified admirals are reluctant to step into a role marked by uncertainty and politicization. Hegseth again avoids specifics. He dismisses headlines, offers vague reassurances, and repeatedly refuses to give a timeline. When pressed directly, when will Congress see the nomination? The answer never comes. In due time becomes the placeholder for accountability, and Sherrill makes sure viewers notice that pattern. Then comes the third pillar, budgetary competence. This is where rhetoric about cutting waste meets numbers that don't lie. Sherrill explains that missing the defense budget deadline isn't a paperwork error. It stalls Congress's ability to pass authorizations and appropriations, increasing the risk of funding delays that directly affect readiness and procurement. She then lists expenditures that clash sharply with claims of fiscal discipline. Hundreds of millions to retrofit a Qatari jet, tens of millions for a military parade, $1 billion bombing campaign with limited deterrent effect, and costly domestic deployments. For viewers, the lesson here is about trade-offs. Every dollar spent on vanity or poorly defined operations is a dollar not spent on long-term threats like China or on sustaining the force itself. Sherrill asks a final, deceptively simple question. What priorities were cut to pay for all of this? Not philosophy, not talking points, specifics. Hegseth can't provide them. He gestures broadly toward border security and trade-offs, but never identifies a single concrete program or capability reduced to fund these initiatives. And that silence reinforces Sherrill's larger argument. Decision-making without transparency isn't strength, it's dysfunction. By the time she yields back, Sherrill hasn't just criticized a secretary, she's walked viewers through how leadership failure looks in practice: confusion at the operational level, instability at the managerial level, and incoherence at the budgetary level. This isn't about partisan disagreement over priorities, it's about whether someone entrusted with the largest military organization in the world can explain their decisions clearly, defend them consistently, and demonstrate control over the institution they lead. And the most revealing part of the exchange isn't the accusations, it's how often basic questions go unanswered.